Hello, Scrufftards, the occasional Vatnik, and all you weird people found online. Welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy, and this is Skruffytalez. And we are gonna take a look at the front line quickly, briefly. We're gonna focus on two uh, major battlefields that are of incredible importance for the war at large. The two defining battlefields where I think Syrskyi and the Ukrainians, they have intentions to use these two major battlefields to properly crush the Russians. They have, those two battlefields are, the first one is Kursk and Sumi, and the second one is Pokrovsk. And those two battlefields are going in Ukraine's favor at the moment. The Russians have realized that they can't fight on in Sumi, that they have walked into a massive trap. They have diverted troops away from the important battlefields, and they're pulling out. Meanwhile, down in Pokrovsk, as we will see, the Ukrainians are hammering the Russians, tying them up, locking them down, and exploiting gaps in the Russian lines, and are now close to potentially being ready to break out of Pokrovsk. Right, so, before taking a look at Pokrovsk, which is the dynamic area of the front line, if you ask me, we're gonna take a look at some other parts here. Zooming in on the Zaporizhzhia front, there are rumors that Russia is building up a large force to make a decisive push towards Zaporizhzhia, and they have been making gains here at Kabyanske, coming up through Plavny, trying to outflank Stepnohirsk on the western side here, pushing into these suburbs in order to bypass these wide open fields, to coming up and being able to move through cover in the smaller towns to make a push on Stepnohirsk, and in so doing unlocking this main highway that will allow them to push further north. Slow going, but they are making gains. And recently, we've also seen this attempt by the Russians, a strong push from two angles, two prongs, coming in this way towards Mala Tokmachka and coming in this way towards Novoekonomichne in order to get closer and reach Orikhiv in the end. And we can see this on Andrew's map, how this push has been assisted by artillery, missile strikes, and airstrikes. If we go, this was on the 1st of September, and then we go back, we can see here strikes. You can see here that the Russians have been dealing with this area for quite some time in preparation for an eventual assault. So the question is, if what we're seeing here on Mayakovsk 73's map, is this that big push that we've been talking about or hearing about, that the Russians will eventually launch in the Zaporizhzhia area, maybe to break through at Orikhiv to reach this supply hub and fortification, and then from here on be able to push on. Who knows? But there are rumors that there's a big build-up. Maybe this is it. But this is a couple of days ago. But, you know, just so you know, Ukraine is attacking, Russia is pushing. It's a slow moving front line. Russia is having some success here. They are slowly advancing, but Ukraine has launched successful counterattacks up here in the north. Gonna take a look at Pokrovsk soon enough. The interesting thing here is, of course, that Russia tried to come down here. According to the official Russian map that we saw a couple of days ago, the Russians are in control of this area all the way down here, almost surrounding Kupiansk. And we know it's a recent map because other features are shown on the map that happened the last week. But the Russian map does not show this push. So the Russians have pushed into a valley down to Sobolivka, surrounded. This here is heavy Ukrainian fortifications down here by the road. Those fortifications continue up this way. So the Russians pushed into a cauldron, surrounded on three sides by Ukrainian defensive positions, fortified positions that were located on the high ground, and the Russians went into a cauldron in a valley, and the Ukrainians came in behind them, cut them off. And you can see Russia is shelling positions that previously were held by Russia, right? Now, the interesting thing is, though, if that map is correct, that the Russians are down here, does that mean that Russia has revealed where they consider that they have infiltration units operating? Do they have radio contact with infiltration groups down here? Have they revealed that they're trying to saturate this area with infiltration units that they have contact with? Did they breach OPSEC by telling the Ukrainians that they have people operating down here? Or maybe that's what they want the Ukrainians to believe, that they've pushed further than they actually have. Who knows? But what we do know is that Ukraine has pushed in and cut off the Russians that were in this valley, and that we have heavy Ukrainian fortifications here and also up here, surrounding this valley on three sides with heavy fortified positions up on the high ground. But yeah, that was that. We will talk about that. Not, oh yeah, we have some gains here. Russia is making pushes here as well. Sumi, this is important. This Sumi Oblast and Pokrovsk. I've been talking about this for, is it 10 months, 12 months? I don't know. Since Kursk began and Pokrovsk kicked off basically at the same time, I've been saying these two battlefields will decide the outcome of the war. And Syrsky had a plan with Kursk, and also I made videos before the Ukrainians left Kursk that they were setting up a trap here in Sumi Oblast, and it all came true. The Ukrainians in January had inflicted 40,000 casualties on the Russians in Kursk, and Russia had at the time 50 to 60,000 troops in Kursk trying to push the Ukrainians out, meaning in those first 6 months of the Kursk operation, Russia had moved 100,000 troops in total. 90,000 to 100,000 troops in total to this area to push the Ukrainians out. And along with that came obviously all support units, all supplies, all logistics, all assets and resources to keep those troops fighting. And they had been moved out of Ukraine and into Russia. And that allowed the Ukrainians to have a greater chance of success within Ukraine on that eastern front line. And fighting here for 8 months, they obviously knew that at some point they would be pushed out. They were hoping to hold on for as long as possible, but I think they realized that sometime in 2025 we will be pushed out more than likely. With a little bit of luck we can hold until 2026, but more than likely we're going to get pushed out in 2025. So they prepared defensive positions here in Sumi, pre-ranging everything, pre-sighting everything for artillery, airstrikes, drones and everything, making sure that that every square inch was pre-sighted for indirect fire and support fire. And then the Russians came and they walked straight into a trap, and like I said, the Ukrainians have prepared a cauldron where they would trap the Russians and then grind them down and continue the efforts of the Kursk operation in locking down 50 to 60,000 Russians here in this area, having removed them from the front line in the east, and here grinding them down in this cauldron, and eventually counterattacking. Like I said, Battle of Cannae 2.0. Force the enemy into a cauldron and start pushing on the flanks, and that is what we've seen. Ukraine has pushed heavily on the flanks and they are pushing the Russians back, and it has gone so far that the Russians have realized this, that they are in trouble. Meanwhile, they're also in trouble down at Pokrovsk, this other part of the battlefield where the Ukrainians have planned to crush the Russians. So they're now moving troops away from here, away from Sumi, to reinforce Pokrovsk. Right? The Russians have realized that they made a mistake pushing in here, and that they need to have troops elsewhere where they're losing significant casualties, and that would be Pokrovsk. So the Kursk and Sumi operation, because they're linked, the Sumi ambush is essentially the third or fourth stage of the Kursk incursion, has worked more or less according to plan. like I said, the Ukrainians probably wanted to hold on to Sudzha a bit longer. But we, like I predicted months before it happening, we knew where the Russians would break in to cut supplies into the Sudzha area and everything. But overall, it has been working. This is also an area where the Ukrainians have basically air parity with the Russians. You can see airstrikes all over the place in this area. Close air support missions and strike missions behind Russian lines. And we also had Ukrainians conducting air assaults with special forces moving in, raiding logistics, guiding in artillery accurately onto supply hubs, ambushing supply convoys, goddammit, and everything. This has been a massive trap, and the Russians are beginning to realize that they are in trouble, that they can't fight effectively in Sumi Oblast. They need to pull back and start reinforcing that other battlefield, Pokrovsk, where they also realize, damn, we are overextended and the Ukrainians have a chance to crush us. So Syrsky had more than likely planned to, in 2 parts, crush the Russian army. Part 1 was Kursk, and part 2 is Pokrovsk. So we're gonna move down, I think, to Pokrovsk, having taken a look at some of the other parts of the battlefield here. So what interesting news do we have from Pokrovsk? First, we're gonna take a look at the ISW map, wrong ISW map, this one. This update was sometime yesterday. We know that Ukrainians pushed in towards Smyrna from the south. The Russian official map confirms this. This push up here is clearly seen on the Russian map, coming up to the east of Myrna, the east of Novoekonomichne. And then we have seen ISW relying on confirmed reports of Ukrainian presence expanding control here in the south of Novoekonomichne. They're coming in from the south, taking street by street, having almost reached the highway here. And keep this in mind. So this is confirmed according to ISW. Take a look what Mayakovsk 73 is showing on his map according to his sources when we now zoom in on Novoekonomichne. A push in the north down to the center of town with Ukrainians holding down here. This area here has been shown as under Ukrainian control for some time on other maps, and this has been a massive issue for the Russians because when Ukraine reached Myrne, they cut this supply line, and that left only this road here coming into, or here as well, coming in from the north to support Novoekonomichne. The Ukrainians have been here for some time according to some maps, and of course, as you can imagine, if the Ukrainians are on these streets, this street is not the most reliable supply line. So the Russians in Novoekonomichne have been almost cut off, reduced logistics reaching them, and the Ukrainians are pushing hard from the south, according to ISW, and here you have Mayakovsk 73 with his sources telling us Ukraine has pushed hard from the north and reached the center of town. We also have some Russian activity down here, along with Ukrainian activity. So this might be sporadic Russian attempts to make something happen down here. We know the Russians have been trying to sort out the situation in Myrne with a push down here. This was before Ukraine had begun moves in Novoekonomichne, and they were only coming up through the south. And the Russians were trying to move in to cut off the Ukrainian advance from the south to Myrne. But the Ukrainians have now almost secured Novoekonomichne, which means that the Russian push in the south will not affect the push to link up with Myrne. And we've also heard that from Ukrainian sources that all of Novoekonomichne has been liberated. So if we take a look at my map, what this might mean overall, it's something like this. Between the two lakes, Ukraine began the push through Myrilobivka according to the Russian map, according to ISW, reaching Myrne. We have a bunch of reports, Russian mill bloggers, Russian soldiers saying that Myrne was overrun. and taken by Ukraine. But as you can see, it's not a reliable route coming up to the north to supply them. So Ukraine needs to open up the main highway here to properly support Myrne. And what they did after cutting the supply line this way and having troops up here being a threat to the Russian supplies coming in from north, they've begun applying pressure on the outskirts and then pushing into town. We saw Ukraine establishing a presence here. We saw them moving into town here. Then ISW said that Ukraine eventually, and this is in the span of a week, yesterday and within the last 48 hours or something, Ukraine had pushed up this way, securing territory here. And now we're seeing Mayakovsk 73 and his sources indicating that Ukraine, having been up here, have since moved down along this street here all the way down to the center of town, where Ukraine early on pushed in with pickups. That leaves not much left for Russia to hold on to in Novoekonomichne. Unless they get ample support and reinforcements in short order, if that doesn't happen, it's only a matter of time before Ukraine will liberate Novoekonomichne, if it hasn't already happened, because that is what reports are saying, that they have indeed liberated the entirety of Novoekonomichne. So we are really, really close to Ukraine having an open road all the way to Myrne. And we know what that means. Operation Hopium. Right? Pushing for Kopcheve, and in so doing, cutting off all supply lines to the troops west of the river. A massive disaster for the Russians. I mean, I've been talking about this just like for as long as I've been talking about Kursk, basically. Pokrovsk had the potential of becoming Stalingrad, the next Stalingrad. And the Russians knew it. Russia has been outside of Pokrovsk and Myrnarad for a year almost, and haven't dared to push in, because they knew they had to cut as many supply lines as possible before making the push to enter town. Because they knew if Ukraine had supply lines leading into town, this is where they could have crushed the Russian military. And so they tried this push into the north, tried to come through here to cut the supply lines leading in from the north, leaving Ukraine with only one supply line open. This has failed. Ukraine has countermoved, locked it down, made sure Russia can't push through and establish a presence north of Pokrovsk, securing the supply lines coming in from the northwest. So Russia moved in, and it appears as if they have indeed overextended, since Ukraine is coming up on Myrne and are now in a position to potentially reinforce Myrne. And what they can do is move on Kopcheve. This is where a supply line moves through Shevchenko-Perche, Kopcheve, to Novoekonomichne, and then you have a bridge right here on Boykivka. So Ukraine cuts this supply line, and reaching Kopcheve, they cut this supply line. And then Russia has precious few options. I've said this before, moving across these wide open fields, Ukrainian drones will destroy anything moving through. Moving on foot or motorbikes and golf carts, gaps where drones can hunt them, more gaps where drones can hunt the Russians. It's gonna be extremely difficult for the Russians to maintain these positions if Ukraine manages this move on Kopcheve, which is why Russia is moving troops from Sumi Oblast down to Pokrovsk. Syrskyi's plan to destroy the Russians in these two battles, between these two battles, Kursk/Sumi and Pokrovsk, is working. Russia had deployed 100,000 troops to the Pokrovsk operational area, and those 100 troops requires reinforcements. That should tell you something about the defenses in this area, and that should tell you something about the casualties Russia has suffered in Pokrovsk. And what Russia has suffered overall in war, since they have to abandon a front line in Sumi to reinforce another front line, right? Russia is struggling in terms of manpower because they have to move troops from one operational area to another, and almost basically admitting defeat in Sumi while reinforcing Pokrovsk to have a chance of maintaining operational maneuvers down here. Really interesting. This is big. And Russia responding with these reinforcements shows us how important it is. Will Ukraine be able to move out of Myrne? Russia will build up forces to lock it down, to deny Ukraine a chance to move out from Myrne. Absolutely. So no guarantees that this will succeed at all. But like we said, moving into Myrne, the most likely outcome would be Ukraine applying a lot of pressure on Novoekonomichne. This is happening. And the next move after that might be a push towards Kopcheve. Of course, the Russians are doing their own things in the area. Claims, nothing confirmed as of yet, that Russia is making a move into center of town with infantry. What we are seeing is a lot of Ukrainian artillery strikes here, along with Russian artillery strikes. So something is happening down here. Yes, we're seeing artillery strikes here, but nothing indicating that Russia is actually making these moves. Maybe we'll see updates in the next 24 hours to give evidence to this, but this is what the pro-Russian social media sources are saying, that Russia is pushing into the center of Pokrovsk. Could be more infiltration units, but what they're saying is that it's a massive push with infantry and equipment taking Pokrovsk. Fighting in Kotlina and Udachne. Udachne is a big, massive gray area back and forth. It's very unclear who is in control of what in this small village. This is a kill zone for both armies, is what it feels like. So Ukraine is holding the line here to defend this supply line. And but yeah, Russia is also making claims that they're pushing in on Shakove from the high ground. Still no confirmation that this is taking place. And like we've said, if Russia can take Shakove and the 5 bridges in the area, they can bypass the situation with Myrne and Kopcheve, because then they can come up this way to Popiv Yar and then move up to Shakove and rely on these bridges to cross the river in order to supply the forces to the west of the river. So Russia has a couple of options. I think they might want to try and lock down the Ukrainians here. I think the Novoekonomichne will be liberated, and then Russians will just try and lock it down to prevent the situation getting out of hand. Meanwhile, they will push harder and harder and harder to reach Shakove, and by doing this, they will be able to securely move troops and equipment and assets across the river at Shakove and reinforcing this part of the battlefield, and then they can begin operations going north, going west, or going south. My predictions. Hopefully, though, Ukraine will push up here and take Kopcheve, forcing the Russians to move this way, and then you know where they will be ending up, and then you can redirect assets, artillery, drones, airstrikes into this area here to hit those Russian forces as they're trying desperately to reach Shakove, while these units are cut off and isolated and begin dwindling in effectiveness as they lose troops over time. Yeah, was there anything else? I guess we can show you if we move in here. Here you go, a Ukrainian flag in the middle of town and everything. So here you can see how the Russians are striking the southern parts of Pokrovsk. This is happening. Let's see what happens if we go back a couple of days. They're bombarding center of town. Ukrainians destroying Russian flag. Ukrainian shelling. So we have Russians in this area here, evidently. Otherwise, you wouldn't have Ukrainian attacks here. I mean, what's this? Ukrainian, yeah, that's when the Ukrainian tank moved in and destroyed a high-rise building. But yet, nothing to indicate what the Vatniks are saying, that there's this big push into the center of town. What is Mayakovsk 73 telling us about it? Same thing, Ukrainians are shelling here. Russia's obviously making a push in the area or have troops here. And the Russians are bombarding this area, maybe to support the flank of a push up this way. Who knows, but still nothing confirmed. Here you can see that you have Ukrainians in Novoekonomichne still, and there seems to be a divide along the main highway here, with the Russians in the southern end of town and a massive back and forth in the northern end. So yeah, that seems to be the situation. But this is extremely interesting, with ISW saying Ukraine is pushing hard in the south, and now Mayakovsk 73 says he has sources indicating a push along these northern streets into the center of town, linking these two pushes potentially. And Ukrainian sources are saying that Novoekonomichne has been liberated in full. So we'll see if that will show up on the maps eventually as well. And before we end the video, as you, like we set up at Kupiansk, has Russia broken OPSEC? Is this where they have radio contact with Jaeger units? Is this where commanders can rely on infiltration units to operate, where they can call in artillery strikes and drone strikes? Is that what we're seeing? Or is it just a propaganda piece? We managed to break through, yada yada, and we know that's bullshit because we can see where they're aiming artillery, and it's not in the north, it's down by Chakove and Rodinsky, not up in this breakthrough. But isn't that interesting if that's what they're saying here, that this is where they have infiltration units operating, and they are telling us and the Ukrainians, this is where we have troops operating behind enemy lines. Just a thought. That would be extremely funny if they messed up that big. But chances are this is just for propaganda purposes and telling Vatnik outlets that, haha, we have successfully broken through, even though no artillery is aimed up north to support our units or hold the Ukrainians at bay. But yeah, I just think it's funny. So, two reports, one from ISW that they say is confirmed that Ukraine has made that push from the south up to the main highway, securing the southern half of Novoekonomichne. And now we have Mayakovsk 73 saying that his interpretation, his sources, are telling him of events on the battlefield, is indicating that Ukraine has made a push from the north of Novoekonomichne along a specific street, linking up with troops in the center of town. So these two reports combined indicates that most of Novoekonomichne is liberated. And this also falls in line with what Ukrainian sources at large are saying, that Ukraine has had massive success in Novoekonomichne in the last couple of days, last 24, 48 hours. So Ukraine might be ready to break out of Pokrovsk. Maybe. We'll see what happens in the coming week. Anyway, that's going to have to be it. I hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, go på marsch, Ukraine, and give them hell.